What's it like whenever a new baby comes into your family? Maybe it's a new baby brother or a new baby sister, and you look and everybody gets so excited. And this little baby needs a lot of looking after. It needs fed, it needs changed, it needs cuddles, it needs nursed. And maybe you've had a chance maybe to nurse the new baby. Maybe it's a new brother or a new sister, and you hold the little baby and you look at its little fingers and you look at its little toes, and everybody gets so excited. Well, in our story today, there's a family and they're so excited because a little baby boy has just been born to them. Now, this story takes place about 3,300 years ago, and it's in a country called Egypt. The father's name is Amram, and the mother is called Jochebed. Now, yes, they were very excited, but they were also afraid. And they were afraid because of this man. You see, at that time, Egypt had a king, and the king was called Pharaoh. In fact, Egypt was it was the most powerful country in the world at that time. And this man, Pharaoh, he was the most powerful man in the world at that time. In fact, some people even worshipped him as a god, but he wasn't a god. He was just an ordinary man, but he was a very powerful man. Problem was, he wasn't only powerful, but he was also a bully. You see, what had happened 400 years before this, there was a man called Joseph, and he was a Hebrew. He followed and loved the one true God. Well, he was one of the main rulers in Egypt at that time, and he had brought his family to live in Egypt with him. The Bible tells me there were 70 people in all. That was men, women, and children, and they had settled in Egypt. Now, at that time, they were treated really well, but now, 400 years later, there wasn't only 70 Hebrews. There was upwards on 2 million, some scholars think. And Pharaoh, whenever he looked at how many Hebrews there were, he thought to himself, what would happen if our enemies attacked us and these Hebrews helped them? Our enemies would be able to defeat us. And Pharaoh, he came up with a wicked plan, and he thought, we will make them slaves. We will make them to work really hard, and we'll treat them really harshly. And that's what he did. In fact, he made them make bricks, and with these bricks, they built houses and they built beautiful cities. Pharaoh made them work really hard. And even around the houses, if somebody wanted their bed made, it was probably a Hebrew slave did it, or maybe make your food, or maybe clean and tidy the house. It was the Hebrew slaves that did this. Pharaoh was a bully. Now, whenever you think of ancient Egypt, I wonder what sort of things you think about. Well, the first thing I thought was these things. These things are called pyramids. And up to date, there's about 130 pyramids have been found all over Egypt. And these pyramids were really tombs. What happened was when somebody really important or really wealthy died, well, they were put into a tomb beneath these huge pyramids. And they weren't only just put in there, but they're put in there with all their treasure. That was the way they did it in those days. And they built this great big structure over the top of the tomb to try and stop grave robbers, to try and stop people robbing and taking away the treasure. One of the most famous tombs ever found was found by a man called Howard Carter in 1923. He was an English archaeologist, and the tomb was the tomb of a famous pharaoh called Tutankhamun. You could maybe Google that and see all the wonderful treasure that was found. The pyramids. Something else I thought about in the ancient country of Egypt was the Sphinx. Now, the Sphinx was a huge structure, and it had maybe bits on it that looked maybe a bit like a cat. Cooper, my dog, got really upset this week because I said to him, in ancient Egypt, they used to worship cats. I'm only joking, he didn't really get upset, he didn't understand. But they actually did. They used to worship cats. And the Bible tells me you should not worship any animal or any graven image, any statues, and definitely not a cat. These are false gods. The Bible tells me there's only one God, it's the God of the Bible, and we should only worship and follow him. Something else that came out of ancient Egypt was the calendar. If you saw a calendar 3,300 or so years ago, this is what their calendar would have looked like. Now, their calendar they invented the calendar with 365 days. The first to invent a calendar with 365 days, the same as ours. And it had the same as ours in months, 12 months. But it had 10 days in their week, we have 7. And it had 36 weeks in the year, we have 52. And then they had 5 extra days for celebrations and feasts. But it was the ancient Egyptians that invented the calendar. So whenever you look at your calendar, you remember this story and where the calendar came from. Well, this man, Pharaoh, he was a bully. And he saw as he watched the Hebrews, even though he treated them really badly, there seemed to be more and more and more Hebrews. But then he came up with another wicked idea, and that was any Hebrews that gave birth to a little baby boy, that little baby boy had to be put to death, had to be thrown into the River Nile. What a wicked law! But what this man Pharaoh was like. You see, he was the most powerful man in the world at that time. There was no one that could stop him. But God was working to a plan. I'm sure maybe God's people were tempted to think, has God forgotten about us? Does he not know what's happening to us? Well, I want you to remember that God does know. Maybe something in your life, maybe something you don't understand, or maybe something that maybe makes you afraid, or maybe something happening at school or home. I want you to remember this, that our God cares, that we can trust God even through difficult times. There's a verse in the Bible that tells us, cast our care on him, the Lord Jesus, for he cares for us. What does that mean? That means tell him. Tell him about things that make you worried and tell him about things that make you afraid, and then trust him to work things out. But that doesn't mean that you don't tell other people as well and tell them what's happening and try and get some help. This man Pharaoh was a bully. While Jochebed, she realized that the Bible tells me that somehow when she looked at her little baby, she realized that this little baby was special, that God had a plan for his life, and she disobeyed the king, but she was obeying God. And the Bible tells me that she hid the little baby for 3 months. Perhaps at the end of 3 months, the baby was getting too big to hide, so she came up with a plan. Sometimes things happen in our lives that we don't understand. There's a verse in the Bible that tells Isaiah 41, verse 13. And look what it says. It says, for I, the Lord your God, will hold your right hand, saying to you, fear not, I will help you. Jochebed trusted that God was going to help her. People, sometimes in our lives, things happen. Maybe there's problems at home, or maybe there's problems at school. Maybe there's even a bully at school. You see, if there ever anything that happens, I want you to make sure you stand up and speak up. You tell someone you can trust what's happening. But the best person you can talk to about these things is God. And I've learned that in my life, that God can work things out the best you ever did see, and God does answer prayer. Remember his promise? Fear not, I will help you. He doesn't say he'll always take the problem away. But what he does say, he says that I will help you through your problems. Trust God no matter what happens. Jochebed was trusting God, and she came up with a plan. She made a basket out of reeds, and then she took some pitch or tar and she put it around the bottom of the basket to make it waterproof. And then she took her little baby, her little son, and she placed him in the basket. Now, the Bible tells me also that this little baby had an older sister, and her name was Miriam. Miriam would have watched and saw all the things that were going on. And then they took the basket down to the river Nile, and they placed the basket into the river. Now, I'm sure Jochebed's heart was maybe sad. She maybe kissed her little baby for the last time, and maybe she just let the little basket go, and she watched as the basket floated down the river. But Miriam, she walked along the bank, maybe kept herself hid in the reeds, but she watched what was going to happen to the little baby. You remember, God was working to a plan. All this was happening just at the right time, because the Bible tells me that just as the basket floated past where Pharaoh's daughter was bathing, Pharaoh's daughter noticed the little basket, and she would have called for one of her servants, go and fetch the basket. And the Bible tells me that as she opened the basket, the little baby cried just at the right time. And the Bible tells me that Pharaoh's daughter had pity on the little baby. Well, Miriam was watching. And Miriam, she came running over and she said, would you like me to get someone to look after that baby for you? Pharaoh's daughter said, yes, go and fetch one of the Hebrew women. Miriam ran. Now, who do you think she ran to? She ran to her mother, and she told Jochebed what had happened. And she said, come quickly, Pharaoh's daughter wants someone to look after your baby, the baby. Now, Pharaoh's daughter didn't know that this was the baby's mother. But whenever Jochebed came along, Pharaoh's daughter handed the baby over and she said, you look after this baby for me. And whenever he's old enough, bring him back to me and I will pay you. Look at the way God had worked things out. God was looking after this little baby because he had a plan for his life. And here was now Jochebed even getting paid to look after her own baby. God is wonderful. He can work things out the best you ever seen. Just trust God like Jochebed did, and God can work things out for you. When the baby was older, or old enough, Jochebed brought him to Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter looked at him and she said, I will call you Moses because I lifted you or drew you out of the water. And that was going to be Moses, was going to be his name. God was working things out. Young people, you trust God because God can work things out for you as well. But remember, the first step in doing that is whenever you put your trust in his son, the Lord Jesus. Remember, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Then remember our promise. As we put our hand in God's hand, as it were, we can trust God because He promises, fear not, I will help you. Remember, the first step is when we put your trust in the Lord Jesus. In our next video, you'll hear more of what God was going to do through this little baby that was called Moses. Thank you for listening.